Fact of the matter has been that today we're discussing payments and payment solutions. And the biggest story there today being that the Africa Import-Export Bank is in Nairobi to interest investors in taking up equity in the institution. The supranational trade finance bank is opening up its shareholding to private investors through the issuance of some $300 million in equity through depository receipt backed by Class D shares. Now, this milestone development for African capital markets is aimed at enabling the bank facilitate and expand the levels of intra and extra-African trade in line with its overall strategy and long-term objectives. The long-term African Export-Import Bank finances promote intra and extra-African trade.
This program was already in plan for several months before the elections. We don't think that the fact of the elections should alter that program, especially as Kenyans have behaved extremely decently with the elections. The Supreme Court has made a decision, and everyone has agreed to comply with that decision. Elsewhere in the world, the people would be praised. Why should we take a different view in our own continent? We should look up to ourselves and be proud about it. So we can't delay the program because of that, and we can't go elsewhere. The continent belongs to us. We must take control of it. We cannot have a view other than a very optimistic view of it, because indeed there is plenty of progress in the continent and there is plenty of opportunity.
As advisors, the way we look at markets is from a very long-term perspective, and secondly, investments continue regardless of events happening in the market, and we see the election really just as an event in a cycle of any economy every 5 years. And so we don't see it as something which should deter people from looking at investments, especially if they are taking a long-term view.
AFREXIM Bank is at the forefront of financing trade in Africa, and for us to be able to do that in a more effective way, we need to be more adequately capitalized. So the reason we are raising additional equity today is to enhance our capitalization so that we will be able to make a meaningful contribution to financing Africa's trade.
Mauritius is part of SADC, Mauritius is part of COMESA. If we are doing all this for India, why can't we be more integrated in the capital and financial market with Africa? So we took on board this and we made it a very first in financial history for Africa, because this is an instrument issued by an African bank, the State Bank of Mauritius, on the back of an ordinary share issued by a Pan-African bank, the AFREXIM Bank, and listed in an African stock exchange, the Mauritius Stock Exchange, and also advised by legal and financial advisors of Africa.
Target investor is the sophisticated investor, the long-term investor, the pension fund. We think this instrument is attractive because of its first currency diversification and its low correlation to the current banking portfolio in Kenya. So this presents an interesting opportunity for these kinds of investors to have a piece in this fantastic institution.
Well, we're still